Something is wrong with America's children. They are sick, allergic, asthmatic, anxious, autoimmune, autistic, hyperactive, distracted, and learning disabled. 32 million American children, a full 43% of them, suffer from at least one of 20 chronic illnesses, not including obesity. And there's a lot of obese children out there. That's a big problem in and of itself. And so this is saying that almost half of American children are suffering from one of 20 chronic illnesses, not including obesity. That's incredible. Almost half of the children in the entire country have a chronic illness. And this was from a few years ago. It might even be higher now. Across the board, once rare pediatric disorders from autism and ADD to type 1 diabetes and Tourette's syndrome are soaring. Though few studies pull the data, compared to their parents, children today are 4 times more likely to have a chronic illness. 4 times more likely. That's only one generation. A lot of times only 25 years, right? Depending on what age the parents have their kids. That's a really short amount of time for the rate of chronic illness to rise 4 times. And while their grandparents might never have swallowed a pill as children, the current generation of kids is a pharmaceutical sales rep's dream come true. More than 1 million American children under 5 years old takes a psychiatric drug. More than 8.3 million kids under 17 have consumed psychiatric drugs. And in any given month, 1 in 4 is taking at least one prescription drug for something. And I suppose this is just the microcosm in the macrocosm of our pharmaceutical society, where the adults are taking a lot of pills and it just kind of trickles down into the children then. Whenever they have a problem, oh, this is how we deal with it. Autism has soared from a rare disorder to something affecting a child in every other classroom. This is incredible. In the 80s, it struck 1 in 10,000 children. By the early 1990s, 1 in 2,500. 5 years ago, it was 1 in 88 children. And today, it is 1 in 68. Think about that. It went from 1 in 10,000 in the 80s to 1 in 68. That is an insane escalation in the amount of children that are being diagnosed as autistic. Acute ear infections have increased worldwide in recent decades and are so common they are almost unremarkable now. They affect 80% of American children by age 3 and are the leading reason for child doctor visits, antibiotic use, and the #1 pediatric surgical procedure, insertion of plastic tubes in the ears. Childhood ear infections cost the healthcare system almost $3 billion a year. 80% of American children by age 3 are having ear problems. That means, for example, if you have 5 kids, 4 out of the 5 of them are going to have ear problems in this way and probably need surgery to put the tubes in their ears. Allergic rhinitis, hay fever, is another one of those current inexplicably soaring pediatric plagues. In 2012, it affected 6.6 million children. It is strongly associated with another spiking childhood disorder, asthma. More than 3 million American kids have a food allergy, and 1 in 4 children have eczema. Worldwide, allergies have been increasing, and they now affect almost half of all American school kids. So what is the takeaway here? Well, obviously, there is an epidemic of illnesses and autoimmune disorders and other just problems that American children are increasingly suffering from. Accordingly, parents all over the country would like to know, hey, what's going on here? And this is where obviously we get into the issue of vaccine safety, because as the next little section here says, fast food, bad genes, too much TV, video games, pesticides, plastics, name the environmental factor, and it has been implicated in the surge of sickness, although none adequately explains the scale or scope of the epidemic, right? There's all kinds of things that can be pointed to as possible reasons for why this is happening. And a lot of those have to do with the toxic environment that we're in, all of these toxic chemicals that we're exposed to. And you can add the electronic frequencies that we are subsumed within now, the cell phone towers that are on seemingly every street corner, the phones that are in pregnant mothers' hands. I mean, hey, maybe the inner ear problem with children is from moms holding their smartphones over their bellies when they're pregnant for 9 months, right? I mean, who knows, right? There could be any sort of explanation that could be given for what is going on here. And this is where we get into the rhetoric of science, right? We are told that science is trustworthy, and we are told that medical doctors, as a form of scientists, are also trustworthy. And it is, of course, scientists in combination with medical doctors and other researchers, professional researchers, that is, with PhDs, who do this for a living, that develop the vaccines that all of the children are taking. My point here is that the scientific method that all of these individuals are purportedly using to develop vaccines and are likewise purportedly using to determine that they are safe, well, that same scientific method, the fundamental principle of it is that you go to where the information takes you, and your conclusion that you reach is based on that information regardless of any personal belief or emotion that you might have. In other words, the scientific method dictates that no possible cause of an epidemic like this would be excluded from consideration. And that is the situation that we are in here, where vaccines are automatically excluded as a possible contributor to this epidemic of child sickness going on in America. And that is the antithesis of the scientific method, you see. Especially when you realize that the current generations of children are getting 50 doses of 14 vaccines by age 6, 69 doses of 16 pharmaceutical vaccines containing powerfully immune-altering ingredients by age 18. And those doses are well in excess of the amount of doses that people from my generation, for example, got in the 80s. When we were kids, I mean, we got maybe 6 to 8 doses of vaccines. We didn't get anywhere close to this amount. And so any scientist, any genuine, honest researcher, any real, genuine doctor would look at this information, would look at the incredible spike in autism, the incredible spike in ear infections, in hay fever, in all of these autoimmune conditions that children are increasingly suffering from, right? a full 43% of America's children suffering from at least one of them, not including obesity. Any honest researcher, doctor, scientist would look at this information and they would say, well, hey, we've got this increasing problem with our kids at the same time that we have this incredible increase in the amount of vaccines that they're getting. I, as a genuine scientist, cannot possibly look at this information and exclude vaccines as a possible contributor to this epidemic. Now, please hear me on this. At the same time, a genuine scientist, doctor, researcher would likewise not say, oh, well, even though there's correlation here, that must be it. It's definitely the vaccines. No, that's not how it works either. You don't go to that other side and say the exact opposite. No, you just say, hey, this is a possibility. We need to do a lot of studies on these vaccines and have it controlled with children who are not getting vaccines. Compare how sick those children get, the ones who don't get the vaccines, to the ones who do. That should have been going on for a long time now. But would you believe it? Of course, there are no studies like that have ever been conducted. I mean, there are a few here and there that have claimed to do that, but then, Snopes comes around and debunks it, allegedly. And nothing ever gets replicated. No one ever tries to replicate those findings, as is the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis, you do your experiment, you come to your conclusion based on the results of the experiment as it relates to your hypothesis, and then you publish that information, and all the other scientists look at the information and try to replicate your findings. And if they can replicate it, hey, you might be onto something here. This could be a real thing that you just discovered. If they can't replicate it, hey, maybe there was some flaw in your process, or maybe you're just completely off base. That's how this is supposed to work, but yet somehow, for some reason, vaccines have been totally excluded from this peer review process. There are no tests done along these lines or studies done along these lines. No, we are just told by alleged scientists and doctors and researchers, in quotes, that vaccines are perfectly safe, it's established, and there's no reason to look into it further. So I hope you see that this is a metaphorical checkmate here that we have placed on the rhetoric. No, if you're going to tell us that science has deemed vaccines as safe, well, we're going to use the exact same scientific method to show that no, there's some real questions here that need to be answered, and vaccines can't be excluded from the discussion. And likewise, this is enough of an issue that we can extend the analysis to the COVID-19 vaccine and the flu vaccines in general that are purported to be safe. But if there is some link here between the increase in the amount of doses that children are getting of vaccines and this epidemic of chronic illnesses that children are now experiencing compared to decades in the past, well, that also brings into question the safety of any other type of vaccine, right? So hopefully you see where I was going here. You followed the chain of logic, and now you can take this information and discuss it with anyone in the way that I just discussed it, and there will be no triggering information. Anybody with an open mind or any semblance of common sense would look at this and say, yeah, hey, I mean, I don't know what the deal is with vaccines, but there's some questions here that need to be investigated further. I mean, at the very least, I can say that. And that's all we really need, right? That's the only opening required here. So I'll leave it at that. Later.